My daughter-in-law sat in the doctor's office holding a list of my medications, doses, times, little handwritten notes in her neat looping script, and said, "We just want to keep her safe, doctor. She's been forgetting things." There was one problem with that list. I had never taken a single pill on it. Not one. I take a blood pressure tablet in the morning and a vitamin D in the winter, and I know this with the certainty of a woman who spent 24 years as an army nurse checking medication orders, where a wrong dose meant a dead soldier. I have handled more medication lists than Sabrina Voss has handled dinner reservations. And the list in her manicured hands, the one she was presenting to my new doctor with tears standing prettily in her eyes, had 11 medications on it. Sedatives, a sleep aid, something for agitation, doses that, taken together by a 69-year-old woman, would make anyone foggy, unsteady, and confused. Which I understood in that exact moment, sitting in a paper gown on the exam table like a specimen, was the entire point. The list wasn't a record of what I took, it was a script for what I was supposed to become. I'm going to tell you how my daughter-in-law spent 5 months building a paper version of me, a forgetful, fading, over-medicated old woman who existed only in documents, and how she nearly traded that paper woman in for my house, my accounts, and my freedom. I'm going to tell you about the doctor who almost believed her, the son who let it happen, and the neighbor in teal scrubs who cracked the whole thing open with one question. But first, you need to understand how someone does this, because they don't start with a list, they start with a story. The story started in February at Sunday dinner with a casserole dish. "Eleanor, sweetheart," Sabrina said, in the bright, concerned voice she used way other people use furniture polish. "Didn't you say you'd bring the green bean thing? We talked about it Tuesday." We had not talked on Tuesday. We had not talked at all on Tuesday. "No, dear," I said, "we didn't speak Tuesday." And Sabrina did something small, so small that if you weren't trained to watch faces, you'd miss it. She let her smile falter, glanced at Craig, and said gently, "Okay, it's fine. It doesn't matter." "Okay, it's fine. It doesn't matter." The 3 phrases you use when it does matter, when you want the room to notice that it matters, when you're not correcting a mistake, but filing an incident. I noticed. I noted it. Actually noted it that night in the spiral notebook I've kept by my bed since 1983, because an army nurse charts everything, and retirement doesn't cure you. February 9th. S claims phone call 2's 2-4. No call in phone log. Craig looked away. I want to be honest with you. I didn't think conspiracy that night. I thought, she's needling me. Sabrina had needled me for 15 years, ever since I suggested, once, mildly, at a rehearsal dinner, that a prenum protects everyone. I thought this was more of the same weather. But the incidents kept coming, and they kept a rhythm. In March, my reading glasses vanished from the kitchen counter and reappeared 3 days later in the freezer, where Sabrina found them with a soft little gasp in front of Craig. In April, a pot was left burning on my stove while I was out at my volunteer shift. The smoke alarm brought a neighbor, and somehow Sabrina knew about it and had told half the family by evening. Mom left the stove on, thank God nothing caught. Except I hadn't cooked that morning. I'd had coffee and toast, and the toaster doesn't use a burner, and the pod was one I keep in the high cabinet I need the step stool for. Someone had been in my house. I changed nothing about my face at family dinners. I smiled. I let Sabrina squeeze my hand and say, "We're just worried about you." And I charted. Dates, times, the pot, the glasses, which stories Sabrina told to which relatives, and how each retelling got a little worse, from "she seemed tired" to "she was disoriented in under a month," the way a rumor metastasizes when someone is feeding it. And in May, 2 things happened that turned my worry into certainty. First, my doctor of 22 years, Dr. Abrams, retired, and somehow, before I'd even gotten his letter, Sabrina had helpfully booked me an intake appointment with a new physician on the far side of the county, A doctor with no history with me. A blank chart. A blank chart is an empty room. You can furnish it with anything. And second, I got a call from my bank's fraud line, a courtesy verification, the young man said, because someone had requested a duplicate debit card and a change of mailing address on my account. The mailing address was Craig and Sabrina's account. I sat in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, looked out the window at the bird feeder Frank hung the year before he passed, and said very calmly, "No, I did not authorize that. Flag the account, please, and note the time of this call." Then I opened my notebook, turned to a fresh page, and wrote the sentence that started the war. They are building a patient. Time to build a chart of my own. Building my own chart started the next morning, and it started where every good chart starts, with a baseline. I called the University Medical Center, not Sabrina's hand-picked doctor on the far side of the county, my own choice, my own referral through the VA, and I booked a full geriatric assessment under my own name, paid from my own account, telling no one. Cognitive testing, medication review, functional evaluation, the works. The young neuropsychologist who ran my testing had kind eyes and terrible coffee, and after 4 hours he leaned back and said, "Mrs. Voss, can I ask what prompted this visit? Your scores are excellent. Frankly, your attention to detail beat most of the 50-year-olds we see." "I know," I said. "I need you to write that down. All of it, with today's date." He studied me a moment. He had good instincts, that boy. And then he said, quietly, "Is someone in your life suggesting otherwise?" "Someone in my life," I said, "is documenting otherwise, and I intend to out-document her." He wrote it down. Every page. I left with a sealed copy and had a second one couriered to a safety deposit box Sabrina's duplicate card request had taught me to open at a different bank entirely, one with no family fingerprints on it. Baseline. Established. May 22. Cognition 96th percentile. Medications 2. Witness. Board certified. Then I did the thing that felt worse than anything else in this whole affair. I started treating my own family home like hostile territory. I had Nadia's husband, he installs security systems for a living, and Nadia, my neighbor in the teal scrubs, you'll hear plenty about her, put 2 small cameras in my house, one covering the kitchen, one covering the hallway to the bedroom, motion activated, cloud storage, invisible unless you knew where to look. I told him it was about a package thief. I also started photographing my pill organizer every morning, 7 compartments, 2 pills each, time-stamped photo every day before breakfast. It took 11 seconds, and it felt insane, and I did it anyway, because the fraud call had told me the blame had moved from stories to paperwork, and paperwork was a war I knew how to fight. 12 days later, the kitchen camera earned its keep. June 6th, a Thursday, 2:14 in the afternoon. I was at my volunteer shift at the VA. The footage shows my back door opening, Sabrina, with a key I never gave her, a key that could only have been copied from Craig's emergency copy, and my daughter-in-law walking into my kitchen with her leather planner under her arm, like she was arriving for a meeting. She didn't steal anything. It was so much stranger than stealing. She opened my cabinets and photographed them. She opened my refrigerator and rearranged it, moved the milk behind the leftovers, put the orange juice in the door where I never keep it. She took my kettle off its base and set it on the stove, on a burner. She opened my pill organizer, looked at it for a long moment, and photographed that too. And then she took out 3 amber prescription bottles from her handbag, held them up near my counter, near, not in, never in, and photographed them there. Staging photos. My kitchen, her bottles. 11 minutes, start to finish. On her way out, she paused by the hallway mirror and fixed her hair. I watched that footage that evening at my kitchen table, and I want to tell you what I felt, because it wasn't rage. Rage came later. What I felt first was a strange, cold, professional respect, the kind you feel watching a well-executed enemy maneuver. She wasn't improvising. This was methodical. The moved juice, the kettle on the burner, the staged bottles, she was manufacturing the physical evidence of a woman losing her grip, one photograph at a time, building a file she could hand to a doctor, a judge, a family gathering. And then I felt the other thing, the heavier thing. She had a key copied from Craig's, which meant my son either knew or had chosen with great care not to know, and I honestly couldn't tell you which of those was worse. I did not confront them. I want you to understand why, because everyone I've told this story asks the same thing. Why didn't you just show everyone the video right then? Because a single video shows a strange visit. It doesn't show a plan. Sabrina would have cried, said she was checking on things, said the bottles were for comparison, said I was paranoid, and paranoid is a wonderful word to hand to someone who's already telling the family you're declining. Played too early, my best card would have become her best card. Triage rule. You don't close the wound while the fragment's still inside. You wait until you can get all of it. So I kept charting, and Sabrina, God help her, kept building, because she had no idea the patient she was inventing was watching her do it in high definition. The appointment with the new doctor, her doctor, Dr. Feld, was set for July 15th. I let it stand. I wanted to see the list. Dr. Aaron Feld's waiting room had soft chairs, soft music, and my daughter-in-law sitting beside me with her leather planner on her lap like a briefcase full of my future. She'd insisted on coming, of course. You know how new doctors are, Eleanor. So many questions. I'll just be there to help fill in the gaps. And Craig, who'd driven us, stayed in the parking lot. He said he had a work call. My son has had a work call at every difficult moment of the last 5 months. Some men hide behind newspapers. Mine hides behind a phone. They called us in together, Sabrina moving before I could object, wedging herself into the consult like she'd been invited, and for the first 20 minutes I watched a masterclass. She was good. I need you to know how good she was, because if you ever face one of these people, the skill is the danger. She never said I was incompetent. She said little, loving things with soft landings. She's always been so sharp. That's why the changes scare us. The stove thing rattled the whole family. We found her glasses in the freezer. She laughed it off, and each time that trailing off, that eloquent little silence, inviting the doctor to finish the sentence with his own diagnosis. Dr. Feld took notes. He was tired, mid-50s, 19 patients deep into his day, and a concerned, organized, well-dressed family member is a gift to a tired doctor. She was doing his work for him, building the chart, furnishing the empty room. Then she opened the planner and took out the list. "I've put together her medications," she said, sliding it across. "Doses and times. We've been helping her manage them. She gets confused about which is which." And there it was, 11 medications in her looping hand, the sedative, the sleep aid, the one for agitation, a pharmacological portrait of a woman circling the drain, the woman she'd been staging photographs of in my kitchen. Dr. Feld frowned at the list. "This is quite a regimen. Mrs. Voss, who prescribes all of this?" And Sabrina, smooth as lake water. "Different doctors over the years. Honestly, that's part of the problem we're hoping you can help sort out. The records are a bit of a mess." The records are a bit of a mess. Beautiful. An explanation in advance for why no pharmacy on earth would have a matching file. She'd thought of the seam and pre-sewn it shut. The room's attention turned to me, the old paper gown, the exam table, the old woman the documents described. And here is the moment I'd been waiting 5 months for. "Doctor," I said, "before we go any further, I'd like you to make 3 calls. You can make them right now. I'll wait.
First, to Ridgeway Pharmacy on Colton Street, the only pharmacy I'd used since 1998. Ask them every prescription filled under my name in the last 5 years. It will take them 90 seconds, and the answer will be 2, lisinopril and vitamin D. Sabrina's smile held, her planner hand didn't. Second, I said, to Dr. Marcus Webb at the University Medical Center, Geriatric Neuropsychology. I signed a release this morning. It's in your intake paperwork, page 4, where I stapled it. He conducted a full cognitive assessment of me on May 22nd. I scored in the 96th percentile. He is expecting your call. Dr. Feld had stopped writing. Third, I looked at Sabrina for this one. I'd earned it. Call whoever you like, a colleague, a lawyer, your compliance office, and ask them what it's called when someone presents a physician with a fabricated medication list for a patient, in writing, in her own handwriting, in order to establish a false record of cognitive decline. Because that document she just handed you doesn't correspond to a single prescription in existence, and I'd hate for it to go missing before someone with authority has photographed it. The soft music played. Somewhere down the hall, a blood pressure cuff sighed. Eleanor. Sabrina's voice was still gentle, still perfect, but the planner was now clutched in both hands. See, doctor, this is what I mean. The suspicion, the stories. June 6th, 2:14 p.m. You entered my home with a copied key while I was at the VA. You moved my orange juice, staged 3 prescription bottles on my counter, photographed my pill organizer, and fixed your hair in my hallway on the way out. You were inside 11 minutes. I turned to Dr. Feld. I have it in high definition, both cameras, and I have time-stamped photographs of my actual pill organizer every morning for the last 6 weeks. I've seen many faces lose their composure in exam rooms. Usually it's bad news from a scan. This was the first time I ever watched a face lose its composure because the patient turned out to be the healthiest person in the building. Dr. Feld set down his pen, looked at the list, looked at Sabrina, and said the 11 words that ended the first battle. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step out."
Sabrina did not step out quietly. Polished people never do. They step out narrating. Of course, I'll be right outside. Eleanor, sweetheart, I know you're upset. Doctor, this is exactly what we've been dealing with. She turns on the people who love her. A hand pressed to her chest, eyes glistening on command. Craig and I are all she has left. The door clicked shut behind her, and Dr. Feld and I sat in the quiet. He picked up the list again, read it properly this time, not as a family's helpful summary, but as evidence. I watched him do the math a trained person does. 11 medications, 3 of them sedating, doses stacked at bedtime. He rubbed his eyes under his glasses. Mrs. Voss, if a patient actually took this regimen, she'd present exactly like the woman my daughter-in-law has been describing. Foggy, unsteady, repeating herself, leaving stoves on. I let that sit. It's not a medication list, doctor. It's a recipe. I need to be careful here. He set the paper down, aligned its edges with the desk, a man buying seconds. What you're alleging is serious, and what I witnessed just now was concerning, but I only met you both 20 minutes ago. Which is why I asked you to make the calls instead of taking my word. Charts, not stories, doctor. Verify everything. Start with the pharmacy. And to his lasting credit, because tired doctors sign things every day that deserve phone calls they never make, he made the calls. Right there, speakerphone off, but I heard his half. Ridgeway Pharmacy, 90 seconds, exactly as promised. Then Dr. Webb's office. That call lasted longer, and toward the end of it, Dr. Feld looked at me over his glasses the way you look at a museum piece. He hung up, wrote for a full minute, then 96th percentile. I had a good breakfast. He laughed, one short, startled bark, the first honest sound in that office all afternoon, and then his face went grave again. Mrs. Voss, I'm required to tell you something, and I want you to hear it as help, not alarm.
What you've described and what I just partially verified has a name: fabricating medical evidence to establish incapacity, combined with the financial activity you mentioned, the card, the address change. This is elder abuse, the financial exploitation variety. There are mandatory reporting pathways, and sitting where I sit, having seen what I've seen today, I'm on one of them. I know, I said. Why do you think I brought it all to a mandated reporter? He blinked, and then Dr. Ehrenfeld smiled at me properly for the first time, the tiredness lifting off him like steam, and said, "You built the venue." I built the chart. The venue was Sabrina's idea. She just didn't check who'd be testifying. We spent the next 40 minutes doing it right. He photographed the list, logged it into my chart as presented by daughter-in-law, provenance disputed, documented my baseline from Webb's report, and filed the report with Adult Protective Services with my statement attached. I gave him Nadia's husband's contact for the camera footage chain of custody. Never hand over your only copy, another rule for the notebook, and the fraud case number from the bank. Paper meeting paper meeting paper. Her file and my file finally in the same room. Hers was prettier, mine was true. And true, when it's properly dated and witnessed, wins. When I walked out to the waiting room, Sabrina rose with her coat over her arm and her face already arranged for the car ride. Wounded, forgiving, generous. "All set, sweetheart? Craig's pulling around. You should call him and tell him to come in instead. Dr. Feld's office will want to speak with the family. And Sabrina," I stopped, close enough to smell her perfume, and kept my voice at exactly the register I once used for interns about to make a fatal error. "APS opens their cases quickly. If I were you, I'd spend tonight finding out whether my husband knew about the key, because right now, everything's in your handwriting. All of it. The list, the notes in the margins, the little dosage times. Craig's name is not on a single page." I watched it land. Watched 5 months of choreography meet one unbudgeted fact. She had built the entire paper trail herself, personally, in her own distinctive looping script, because she was meticulous, because she trusted no one to do it properly, because delegation was for lesser planners. Her handwriting, her staging photos on her phone, her key. Everything's in my handwriting because I'm the one who cares. "Well," I said, and buttoned my cardigan, "and you're about to find out exactly how much that costs." Out in the parking lot, my son sat in his idling car with his phone against his ear, and through the windshield his eyes met mine, and for the first time in 5 months, he didn't look away. He looked terrified. Good, I thought. Now we can finally begin.
Craig came to my house alone that evening, without her, for the first time in longer than I could remember. He stood on my porch holding his keys, like he wasn't sure they still worked here, and there's an irony in that image I'd have appreciated more on a different day, and he said, "Mom, whatever you think is happening, come inside, Craig, and don't finish that sentence, because you don't know what you think is happening. That's been your entire strategy since February." He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Frank taught him fractions. I made tea because we're not animals, and then I put my laptop in front of him and pressed play on June 6, 2:14 p.m. I watched my son watch his wife walk through my back door. I've delivered a lot of bad news across a lot of small tables, to soldiers, to families, once to a general whose son didn't make it off the table. There's a moment in every one of those conversations where the person stops preparing their response and starts actually seeing. With Craig, that moment came when Sabrina picked up my kettle and set it on the burner. His face didn't crumple, it emptied, like a building when the power cuts. "The stove," he said, "in April. The pot. She told everyone. She told everyone." He watched to the end, the bottles, the staged photographs, the hair fixed in my hallway mirror. Then he pushed the laptop back an inch, very carefully, the way you push something that might still be hot, and put his face in his hands. "How long have you known?" he asked through his fingers. "How long have you?" The kitchen clock ticked,
And my son, 43 years old, my only child, the boy who cried when we buried the dog under the maple, said the truest and worst thing he's ever said to me. I didn't know, but I didn't check, Mom. She'd tell me things, the glasses, the stove, the confusion, and none of it sounded like you, none of it. And every time that little voice said that doesn't sound like Mom, I just turned it down, because checking meant asking my wife why she was lying, and I couldn't afford that question. Couldn't afford it, why? He was quiet for a long time. Because of the money, he finally said. Mom, there's something you don't know. And that is how at 9 o'clock at night at my kitchen table, I learned the engine underneath it all. Craig's construction business, the one he'd told the whole family was thriving, the one that paid for Sabrina's pastel blazers and the lake house lease, was 14 months from bankruptcy. 2 commercial clients gone. A loan Sabrina had convinced him to take against the house. He'd been drowning quietly since last spring, and drowning men don't audit their wives. Sabrina, who ran their books, had known before he did. And Sabrina had also known because she'd asked my accountant at Thanksgiving, in her light little way, one question dressed as small talk, roughly what my house and Frank's pension accounts came to. She never said the plan out loud, she said. It was never, nobody ever sat down and said, let's do this. It was just, suddenly there was a story about you declining, and the story kept growing, and one day power of attorney was in a sentence at dinner like it had always lived there, and I let it live there. Because if you needed managing, his voice cracked clean in half, if you needed managing, Mom, then the money problem had a solution, and I didn't have to be the failure who lost Dad's. He stopped, started again. I didn't have to be the failure. She built me a story where being weak looked like being responsible, and I moved into it. I sat with that. It would have been easy to comfort him, and it would have been easy to flay him, and neither was my job. My job, the job it had been since February 9th, since the first line in the notebook, was to chart accurately. Here's what happens now, I said. APS has a case open, the bank has a fraud file, Dr. Feld has the list, and the list is in her handwriting, and forensic document examiners are very good at their work. None of that can be unrung, Craig, and I wouldn't unring it if I could. Your wife tried to chemically erase me on paper and take my home. There are consequences coming that belong to her. He nodded hollow. But there's one consequence that belongs to you, and only you get to decide it. I closed the laptop. APS will interview you, so likely will an investigator, and you are going to walk into that room and be exactly one of 2 men, the husband who corroborates her story, or the son who tells the truth. There's no third man, I checked. I've been checking for 5 months. My son looked at the closed laptop, at the kitchen, at the high cabinet with the step stool, where a pot he never questioned had come from. When they interview me, he said, they'll ask about the key. Yes, she told me she'd lost her copy of Our House Key, asked to borrow mine for a weekend, in March. He looked up. Mom, she never gave it back to a locksmith, did she? No, I said gently. She gave it to your mother's back door. And Craig Voss took out his phone right there at my kitchen table, dialed a number, and said 5 words I'd waited 5 months to hear him say to anyone. I need my own lawyer.
The APS investigator was a compact, unhurried woman named Marisol Reyes who took notes in green ink and missed absolutely nothing. She interviewed me twice, once at my kitchen table, once at her office. And if you're picturing an interrogation, don't. Good elder abuse investigators work like good triage nurses. Vitals first, story second, feelings last. She wanted dates. I had a notebook full of them. She wanted the footage. She got it, with chain of custody documentation Nadia's husband had kept like a man who'd testified before. She wanted my baseline, Dr. Webb's report, sealed copy, safety deposit box, second bank. At our second meeting, she set down her green pen and looked at me for a moment. "Mrs. Voss, I've worked 400 of these cases. Financial exploitation, fabricated decline, the whole choreography. Do you know what I almost never have? Documentation from the victim's side. I almost never have a victim who outcharted the perpetrator. Usually, I'm reconstructing what happened to someone. This is the first time I've walked into a case someone had already built for me, indexed with timestamps." She tapped my notebook. "February 9th. You started this in February." "I started this in 1983, I said. "February was just when I opened a new page." The forensic document examination took 6 weeks and confirmed what any of us could see: the medication list, the margin notes, the dosage schedule, all one hand, Sabrina's. The staging photographs were still on her phone when the investigator's subpoena reached it, neatly albumed, because meticulous people are meticulous everywhere, right? Until the moment their filing system becomes the state's Exhibit C. The bank produced the duplicate card request with her verbal verification recorded. She'd answered my security questions, my mother's maiden name, my first duty station, information gathered across 15 years of family dinners. The recording of her voice saying my life's answers in her lake water calm was the single piece of evidence I found hardest to sit through. Not the kitchen footage, that. A thief in your house takes your things. A thief on that phone line was wearing me. Craig testified, truthfully, completely, against his own interest where his interest deserved it: the key, the loan, the dinners where the story grew, and he watered it with silence. His lawyer had advised him to shade some of it. He didn't. It's the only reason he and I have Sunday dinners today, and he knows it, and we've never once had to say so out loud. They charged Sabrina in November: attempted financial exploitation of an elder, fraud in connection with the bank instruments, and the one her attorney fought hardest, the one that mattered most to me, falsification of medical documentation. Her lawyer floated the defense you'd expect: a devoted caregiver, overwhelmed, perhaps overzealous, acting from love. The prosecutor played the kitchen footage and let the jury watch a devoted caregiver fix her hair in my hallway mirror. She was convicted in the spring: suspended sentence, restitution, 5 years of probation, and a permanent protective order. The courts are gentler with paper crimes than with crowbar crimes, a fact I've made my peace with, mostly. She and Craig's divorce finalized 2 months later. The forensic accountant Craig's lawyer hired found she'd been moving money out of the business for 3 years into an account titled, and I want you to savor this, in her mother's name. Sabrina Voss, it turned out, had been running the same play on her own husband the entire time, just slower. The construction business survived. Barely. Leaner, but it survived. And it survived clean. Because the first thing Craig did after the verdict was sit down with the accountant, the second was sit down with a bankruptcy counselor he ended up not needing, and the third was sit down at my kitchen table and slide a piece of paper across it to me. I flinched. I developed a reflex about paper sliding across that table. "Read it," he said. It was the deed to Craig and Sabrina's lake house lease, canceled, and beneath a check. Not a huge check, but I knew his books by then, and I knew exactly how many months of careful living that check represented. For the cameras, the lawyer, the lock changes, all of it. I did the math from your notebook. "Craig, you don't have to." "Mom," my son looked at me with Frank's eyes, steady for the first time in 2 years. "You charted everything. Let me settle the account." I took the check. Not because I needed it, because he needed me to.
Now, let me tell you about Nadia, because I promised you at the start that a neighbor in teal scrubs cracked this open with one question, and I keep my promises the way I keep my charts. It was late March, before the cameras, before I fully understood what I was fighting, and Nadia Okonkwo was on my porch with lemon cake, the way she'd been most Thursdays since her family moved in next door. She's a home health physical therapist. She spends her working life in the houses of people my age, which means she has seen every version of what families do to the old, the loving versions and the other ones. Sabrina had just left after one of her visits, and Nadia watched the car pull away and was quiet a moment, and then asked me the question that turned the lights on. Miss Eleanor, when your daughter-in-law tells those stories about you, who is she usually telling them to? Not, are the stories true? Not, are you okay? Who is the audience? And I sat there with my tea and ran it back, and the answer assembled itself like a diagnosis. She never told the stories to me. She told them past me, to Craig, to the cousins at Easter, to the neighbor at the mailbox, to anyone who might one day be asked, at a hearing or a dinner or a deposition, and had you noticed changes in Eleanor? She wasn't describing me, she was preloading witnesses. In my job, Nadia said, cutting the cake like we were discussing weather, the families that worry me are never the ones asking the patient questions. They're the ones building an audience. You want my advice, Miss Eleanor? Start writing down who hears what. Dates, audiences. A story that only ever travels away from you, she handed me a slice, is not a story, it's a case. Who hears what? Dates. Audiences, it went in the notebook that night, and everything I built afterward, the baseline, the cameras, the photographs, the second bank, stood on that foundation. Marisol Reyes told me later that the audience map in my notebook, the little diagram of which relative had been fed which incident and when, was the single most damning exhibit in the file. It proved architecture. Malice has an org chart, and I had drawn it. Nadia testified too, by the way. 10 minutes, teal scrubs, devastating. When Sabrina's lawyer suggested she was hardly qualified to assess family dynamics, Nadia said, "Sir, I've been in over 1,000 homes where someone old is getting weaker. I know the sound of a family holding someone up. I know the sound of a family softening the ground. I've buried patients under both." Nobody had a follow-up question. So here is what I want to leave with you, from my porch, with the bird feeder Frank hung still swinging in the evenings. If you are my age, the most dangerous sentence in the world is not shouted, it's said softly, past you, to someone else. We're just worried about her. Worry that never asks you anything isn't worry. Chart it, date it, note the audience. Get your baseline in writing while they still think you're not capable of it. A cognitive test taken early is armor. One taken late, on their schedule, at their doctor, is a trap. Keep your own pharmacy, your own doctor, your own locksmith, and one account no family hand has ever touched. This is not paranoia. Paranoia is fear without evidence. This is nursing. If you love someone my age, be Nadia. You don't need cameras or lawyers to start. You need her question. When the family stories about someone begin to travel, follow them. Ask who the audience is. Sit with the person themselves and ask them something, anything, and actually wait for the answer. The whole machine Sabrina built ran on one fuel, nobody checking with me. One neighbor with lemon cake checked, and the machine started dying that afternoon. And if you are a Craig, if there's a little voice saying that doesn't sound like mom, and you keep turning it down because the question underneath it is too expensive, hear me from a mother who got her son back. The question only gets more expensive. Ask it now. Ask it while asking is still all it costs. I'm 69 years old. I take 2 pills a day, and I know exactly what they are. Sunday dinners are at my table now. Craig brings the casserole. Nadia and her husband come, and her kids call me Nana Voss, and last month my son laughed at the table, really laughed, and I wrote nothing down that night, because some evenings, at last, don't need charting. If this story made you think of someone, a sharp one being softly rewritten, or a little voice you've been turning down, go check on them this week. Ask them a real question and wait for the real answer. And tell me below, because I read every comment from this porch. What's the question you should have asked sooner?